I was 11 years old when my parents told me they were leaving the country for a month. Not next year. Not someday. In 3 days. They said it casually, the way some parents announce a weekend getaway. We were standing in the kitchen of our house in Maplewood Ridge, a quiet suburban neighborhood outside Portland, Oregon. The refrigerator was humming, the dishwasher was running. Everything felt normal. Too normal. My name is Evan Carter, and at 11 years old, I still believed that parents always had a plan. My mother, Laura Carter, was leaning against the counter scrolling through her phone. My father, Michael Carter, stood by the window, looking out at the backyard, arms crossed. Laura cleared her throat and said, almost cheerfully, "Your dad and I are going to Europe for a month." She said it like she was talking about a yoga class. Paris, Rome, Barcelona. She listed the cities while smiling, as if the names alone were enough to explain everything. She talked about museums, food, walking tours. She talked about how much they needed this break. I waited for the next sentence, the one about my grandparents, or a babysitter, or staying with a friend. It never came. I finally asked, "So where will I stay?" Laura looked up, slightly annoyed, like I had interrupted something obvious. "Here, at home," I laughed, because I thought she was joking. My dad did not turn around. Laura sighed. "Evan, you are 11. You are responsible. You know how to take care of yourself. It is only a month. Only a month." She opened her purse and placed two $10 bills on the kitchen table. Then she slid a silver credit card next to them. "This is for emergencies," she said. "Do not use it unless it is really serious." I stared at the money. $20. For groceries, I asked quietly. Laura waved her hand. "You will be fine. We stocked the pantry, and the card is there if something happens." My dad nodded once, still facing the window. "You are mature for your age," he said. That was the entire discussion. 3 days later, I watched them load their suitcases into a rideshare car. My mom hugged me quickly, already distracted. My dad told me to lock the doors at night. Then the car drove away. They did not look back. The house felt different the moment the door closed. Bigger, louder in its silence. That night, I lay in bed listening to the clock tick and the refrigerator hum, trying to convince myself that this was normal, that this was what independence felt like. The next morning, I opened the fridge. It was not stocked, some leftovers, a half-gallon of milk, condiments. That was it. I counted my money again. $20, 30 days. I did the math on a scrap piece of paper. Less than $1 a day. I pulled out the credit card and tried to order food online. I typed in the numbers carefully, hit confirm, declined. I tried again, declined. I called the number on the back of the card. The automated voice was calm and polite. "This card has not been activated." I hung up and sat on the kitchen floor for a long time. My parents were in Europe. I was 11 years old, and I was completely alone. But this is where I need to tell you something important. 30 days later, my parents would return home. They would throw a welcome back party. Friends, neighbors, coworkers, music, food, laughter. And in the middle of that party, the police would walk into our living room. That is not a metaphor. That actually happened. I am telling you this now because what followed over the next month was not loud. It was not dramatic. There were no screaming matches or sudden rescues. It was quiet, slow, invisible. And that is how most real disasters begin. If you are listening to this and something already feels wrong, I want you to stay with me, because what looks like independence on the surface can sometimes be something much darker underneath. Before we continue, let me ask you something. Do you think an 11-year-old can survive alone for a month with $20 in a card that does not work? If you have a thought, drop a comment with the number 1. I want to know what you think before the story continues. Part 2 is where everything starts to unravel. What made everything harder was that from the outside, nothing about my family looked broken. If you drove through Maplewood Ridge, our house fit perfectly into the neighborhood. 2 stories, fresh paint, a clean lawn that my dad mowed every Saturday when he was home, a white SUV in the driveway, a darker sedan in the garage. Inside, everything had a place. The couch pillows were always straight. The counters were always clear. There were no signs of chaos or struggle. That was important, because chaos is what people look for when something is wrong. My parents were not careless. They were organized. They were respected. And most of all, they were convincing. My mother, Laura, cared deeply about how our life looked to other people. not just to friends or neighbors, but to anyone who might be watching. She documented everything: birthdays, holidays, weekend trips, Sunday dinners. Our life existed online in carefully chosen frames. She used words like grateful and blessed a lot. So thankful for this little family. Could not ask for more. Her posts were polished, bright lighting, smiling faces, perfect angles, but there was something strange about them. I was rarely in those photos. When I was younger, I did not notice. Or maybe I noticed, but did not know how to explain the feeling. When you grow up inside something, it feels normal even when it is not. If I appeared in a picture, I was usually on the edge of the frame, half turned away, cropped at the shoulder. Sometimes my face was not visible at all. Laura would say things like, "Evan does not like photos," or "he is shy." I was not shy. I just learned early how to disappear. When guests came over, Laura introduced me as the easy one. "Evan does not need much attention. He is very independent. He likes being alone." She would say it with a laugh, and people would smile and nod. Independence sounded like a compliment. No one questioned it. My dad, Michael, played a quieter role. He worked long hours and came home tired. He was not cruel. He was not loud. He just was not there in the ways that mattered. When my mom made decisions, he agreed. When she spoke, he listened. Silence became his way of staying out of conflict. That silence taught me something important. If no one was yelling, then nothing was wrong. If no one was hitting, then nothing was wrong. If the house was clean and the bills were paid, then nothing was wrong. So when my parents left me alone, it did not feel like a sudden break from who they were. It felt like an extension of everything that had already been happening. I had been making my own breakfast since I was 8, walking to school alone, signing permission slips when my mom forgot. Being left alone for a month was extreme, but it was not completely unfamiliar. That is why no one suspected anything. Neighbors saw the lights on. Teachers saw me come to school every day. My parents posted photos from Europe, smiling and relaxed. The story everyone saw made sense. What no one saw was the gap between the image and the reality. At night, after homework, I sat on the couch scrolling through my mom's social media posts. New photos appeared every few days. Cafes, landmarks, hotel balconies, captions about freedom, and finally, resting. I looked at those images and tried to understand how two versions of the same family could exist at once. In one version, my parents were travelers, successful, loving, the kind of people others admired. In the other version, I was counting slices of bread and deciding which meals to skip. The strangest part was that Laura still messaged me occasionally, not to ask if I was okay, not to ask what I ate. She would send short texts reminding me not to bother neighbors or saying things like, "Do not forget to water the plants." Once, I told her the fridge was almost empty. She replied with a thumbs up emoji. I started to understand that this was not about money or planning or a misunderstanding. This was about priorities. The image came first. The story came first. Everything else adjusted around that. I did not tell anyone because I did not know how. How do you explain neglect when there are no bruises? How do you ask for help when the adults around you seem proud of how independent you are? People assume children are loud when something is wrong, but sometimes we go quiet. We become smaller. We adapt. I adapted. I stopped expecting check-ins. I stopped waiting for concern. I stopped believing that being visible would make anything better. And that is what made the situation dangerous. Because when a child learns to disappear, no one notices when they are gone. Part 3 is when the quiet begins to crack, when hunger becomes impossible to hide, and when one person finally starts asking the questions no one else did. The first few days after my parents left felt strangely quiet rather than frightening. I kept telling myself this was temporary, that once I figured out a system, everything would be fine. Adults always talked about budgeting like it was just math. Spend less than you have. Plan ahead. Be responsible. So I tried to be responsible. I sat at the kitchen table with a pencil and a scrap of paper and wrote it out. $20, 30 days, less than $1 a day. Seeing it written down made my stomach tighten, but I told myself I could make it work if I was careful. On day 3, I walked to the grocery store alone. It was only a few blocks away. I moved slowly through the aisles, picking up items and putting them back, doing the math over and over in my head. Ramen noodles were cheap. Bread was cheap. Peanut butter lasted a long time. I bought 6 packs of ramen and 1 loaf of white bread. The cashier smiled at me and asked if my parents were waiting outside. I said yes without thinking. Lying came easily when telling the truth felt dangerous. Back home, I lined everything up on the counter like supplies for a mission. I decided 1 pack of ramen could be split into 2 meals if I drank more water. Bread would be for the days when I felt too tired to cook. I told myself this was fine. That night, I tried the credit card again. Declined. I called the number on the back one more time, hoping the system would somehow change its mind. It did not. The recorded voice repeated the same sentence. The card was not activated. That was the moment something shifted inside me. Not panic. Not yet. Just a heavy understanding that settled in my chest. This was not a mistake. No one was coming to fix this. I texted my mom. I said the card did not work. She replied hours later with one sentence. Just be careful with money. I stared at the screen for a long time before putting my phone down. Each day began to blur into the next. I started keeping track of time by meals instead of hours. Half a pack of ramen in the morning, half at night. Some days, just bread. The hunger never fully went away. It sat quietly in the background, like a low buzzing sound that never turned off. By the end of the first week, my head hurt constantly. Standing up too fast made the room spin. At school, I focused on keeping my face neutral. I did not want anyone asking questions. Teachers praised me for being quiet and focused. No one noticed I stopped raising my hand. At night, I scrolled through my parents' photos. New posts appeared regularly. Smiling faces, plates of food I could barely pronounce, captions about freedom and finally relaxing. I tried calling my dad once. He answered, distracted, the sound of traffic behind him. I told him I was hungry. He laughed softly and said, I should not exaggerate. He reminded me that my mom left money and that I was old enough to handle things. Then he ended the call. I stopped calling after that. The timeline became important to me. I started counting days because numbers felt solid when everything else felt uncertain. Day 8, day 10, day 12, I marked them on the calendar in the kitchen. By the second week, I stopped feeling hunger the way I expected. It was no longer sharp. It was dull and constant, like my body had accepted this as the new normal. That scared me more than the empty fridge. I began skipping meals without thinking about it. Saving food felt safer than eating it. Hunger became something I could control when everything else was out of my hands. I still went to school. I still did my homework. From the outside, nothing had changed. That was the most dangerous part. Because neglect does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks quiet. Sometimes it looks like a child doing exactly what they have been taught to do. Do not complain. Do not bother anyone. Do not make problems. By day 14, I had lost weight. I noticed it when my clothes started to feel loose, when climbing the stairs made my legs shake, when concentrating became harder. I stood in front of the mirror one night and barely recognized myself. My face looked smaller. My eyes looked tired. I told myself it was temporary, just a few more weeks. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Not just with my body, but with the idea that I was supposed to handle this alone. If you are listening to this right now, I want to pause for a moment. Do you think a child should ever have to ration food like this just to survive? If you have a thought, leave a comment with the number 1. I am reading them, and I want to know how this sounds to you from the outside. Because in part 4, someone finally starts to notice what I was trying so hard to hide. By the 3rd week, my body stopped cooperating with the story I was trying to tell the world. I could still pretend things were fine. I could still smile when spoken to, but I could not hide what was happening underneath my skin. The first thing I noticed was how tired I felt all the time. Not the kind of tired that goes away with sleep, but a heavy exhaustion that settled into my bones. Waking up felt harder every morning. My alarm would go off, and I would lie there staring at the ceiling, trying to gather enough energy just to sit up. At school, I struggled to focus. Words on the page blurred together. When teachers spoke, their voices felt distant, like they were coming from the end of a long hallway. I caught myself zoning out in the middle of lessons I used to enjoy. Writing became difficult. My hand shook slightly when I held a pencil. It was subtle at first, easy to explain away as nerves or cold. But I noticed it. I noticed everything. My clothes started to hang differently. Pants that used to fit snugly slipped down unless I tightened the belt. Sleeves covered more of my hands than they used to. One morning, I pulled on my favorite hoodie and realized it looked too big now. I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual, turning sideways, trying to understand the change. My face looked thinner. My eyes had dark circles underneath them that no amount of sleep seemed to fix. I told myself it was just stress, that I was growing, that kids changed all the time. But deep down, I knew the truth. Hunger was no longer just a feeling. It was shaping how my body moved, how my brain worked, how much space I took up in the world. I started sitting in the back of the classroom more often. It was easier to blend in there, easier to avoid attention. When group work was assigned, I let others take the lead. Talking took more energy than I wanted to spend. My teacher noticed before anyone else. Her name was Miss Reynolds, and she had taught long enough to recognize patterns. She asked me one afternoon if I was feeling okay. Her voice was gentle, casual, the kind of tone adults use when they are testing the water. I nodded quickly and said I was just tired. She looked at me for a moment longer than necessary. Then she smiled and let it go. But she did not forget. Over the next few days, she started paying closer attention. She noticed how slowly I moved between classes, how I barely touched the food I brought for lunch, how I wore the same few outfits on repeat. None of these things alone meant anything. Together, they told a story. I tried harder to hide it after that. I ate lunch in the bathroom sometimes, pretending I just was not hungry. I kept my head down. I avoided eye contact. If I could make myself small enough, maybe no one would worry. At home, the days blurred together. The fridge was nearly empty. I stopped opening it as often. Seeing the lack of food felt worse than the hunger itself. I started feeling dizzy when I stood up too fast. Once, the room went completely black for a second, and I had to grab the counter to steady myself. My heart raced afterward, pounding in my ears. That scared me. I thought about calling my parents again. I even picked up the phone one night. But I imagined the same responses, the reminders that I was old enough, the subtle accusations of exaggeration. I put the phone down. What I did not realize then was that this was the point where the situation stopped being something I could manage on my own. Because when a child starts losing weight rapidly, when concentration fades, when physical weakness becomes visible, it is no longer just a family issue. It becomes a safety issue. Miss Reynolds was not the only one paying attention. The school nurse called me in one afternoon to check my vitals. She asked routine questions, but her eyes lingered on the numbers longer than I expected. She wrote something down on a clipboard and told me to take care of myself. Her tone was kind, but serious. Walking back to class, I felt a strange mix of fear and relief. Fear that someone might find out. Relief that someone might finally see me. That is the part people rarely talk about. When you have been invisible for long enough, being noticed feels dangerous and comforting at the same time. By the end of that week, it was clear I could not keep this going much longer. My body was sending signals I could no longer ignore. I was running out of energy, running out of options. And somewhere behind the scenes, adults were starting to connect the dots. I did not know it yet. But the quiet phase of the story was ending. In part 5, the questions become more direct. The silence breaks, and the truth I was trying to hide begins to surface in ways I never expected. By the time the school started asking questions, I knew I could not keep pretending everything was fine. The truth was already showing on my body. It was only a matter of time before it reached someone who would not let it go. That realization scared me enough to try one more time. I called my mom late one evening. I waited until it was quiet in the house, until the sun had gone down, and the kitchen lights were the only ones on. I wanted her to hear it in my voice. I wanted her to understand that this was not a small problem. She answered on the third ring. I told her I was not feeling well. I told her I was dizzy. I told her I did not think the food would last until they came back. I spoke slowly, carefully, trying not to sound dramatic. There was a pause on the line. Then she sighed. "Evan," she said, "you are making this bigger than it is." She reminded me that she left money. She reminded me that I had been fine before. She told me I needed to stop worrying and handle things like the mature kid she knew I was. I asked her again about the credit card. She said she would look into it. She did not. Before hanging up, she added something that stayed with me longer than the hunger. "Do not talk about this with anyone else," she said. "People misunderstand things. You do not want to make us look bad." The call ended, and I sat there holding my phone, staring at the dark screen. I tried texting my dad the next day. I told him school was hard. I told him I was tired all the time. His response came hours later. "You will be fine. Listen to your mother." That was it. No questions, no concern, no plan. After that, my mom started sending messages that felt different, shorter, sharper, less patient. One night she wrote that if I kept complaining, people would start asking questions. She said that once people started asking questions, things could get complicated. She said families like ours did not need that kind of attention. She never said the word punishment. She did not have to. The message was clear. Stay quiet, protect the image. I stopped reaching out after that. Not because I wanted to be silent, but because I was afraid of what would happen if I was not. I had already learned that being honest did not bring help. It brought dismissal, and now it brought warning. That kind of fear is hard to explain if you have never felt it. It is not loud. It does not feel like panic. It feels like pressure slowly closing in, like the walls are moving and you do not know where the door is. I started replaying her words in my head. "Do not make us look bad. People misunderstand." I wondered if she was right. Maybe I was exaggerating. Maybe I was supposed to handle this on my own. Maybe asking for help really would cause more problems than it solved. But my body kept telling a different story. I was weaker every day, more tired, more unfocused. And I realized something else. If something happened to me, if I got seriously sick or passed out or worse, there would be no explanation that made sense. There would be no record of what I tried to say, only silence. That thought scared me more than my parents being upset. So I did something quiet, something small, something that felt almost invisible. I started documenting my days. It was not dramatic at first. I did not tell anyone. I did not announce it. I just used the tablet my parents left behind. Every morning, I recorded the date. I filmed the inside of the refrigerator. I showed what food was left. I stepped on the scale and recorded the number. I read my mom's messages out loud, word for word. I kept a notebook too. Meals, how I felt, when I felt dizzy, when I could not focus. I wrote everything down without emotion. Just facts. It did not feel like rebellion. It felt like insurance. I was not trying to get anyone in trouble. I was trying to make sure that if someone finally listened, there would be proof. Something solid. Something that did not depend on whether a kid sounded believable enough. The fear was still there, but it changed shape. Instead of feeling trapped, I felt prepared. I still did not know who would see any of it. I still did not know what would happen next. But for the first time since my parents left, I felt like I was doing something to protect myself. Silence had stopped feeling safe. If you are listening to this, I want to ask you something. Do you think it is fair for a child to be told to stay quiet just to protect an adult's reputation? If you have a thought, leave a comment with the number 1. I want to hear how this sounds from your perspective. Because in part 6, someone finally sees the evidence I was collecting. And once that happens, the story moves in a direction none of us expected. Once I started documenting my days, something inside me changed. Not all at once, not dramatically. It was quiet, like a switch being flipped somewhere deep in my mind. I was still hungry, still tired, still alone in the house every night, but I was no longer completely powerless. Each morning became part of a routine. I woke up, checked the calendar, and said the date out loud before turning on the tablet camera. I filmed the inside of the refrigerator, slowly, carefully, making sure everything was visible. The empty shelves, the condiments, the single loaf of bread shrinking day by day. Then I stepped on the scale. I made sure the number was clear on screen. I did not comment on it. I just let it exist. After that, I recorded how I felt. Short sentences, no exaggeration. Dizzy when standing, headache since morning, trouble concentrating at school. I did not cry on camera. I did not raise my voice. I spoke the way adults do when they are giving a report, because that was what this had become, a report. At night, I wrote everything down in a notebook. I dated every page, what I ate, how much, when I felt weak, when I felt scared, when my mom texted, when my dad did not answer. Facts only. I saved screenshots of every message, every missed call, every time the credit card was declined. I even recorded myself calling the bank again, letting the automated message play all the way through. This card has not been activated. I remember sitting at my desk afterwards, staring at the wall, realizing how strange it was that an 11-year-old was doing this. Building a case, preserving evidence, preparing for a future conversation that had not happened yet. But there was another reason I kept recording. It helped me trust myself. When you are told repeatedly that you are exaggerating, that you are dramatic, that you are imagining things, you start to doubt your own experience. You start wondering if the hunger is real or if you are just weak. If the fear is justified or if you are just sensitive. Seeing everything laid out on video and paper made it undeniable. The fridge was empty. The numbers on the scale were dropping. The messages were dismissive. I was not imagining this. That mattered more than I realized at the time. The videos gave structure to the days. They turned time into something measurable. Instead of feeling like I was drifting, I felt like I was moving forward, even if I did not know toward what. I started labeling the files by date. Day 16, day 17, day 18. The timeline mattered. At school, I kept my routine the same. I still did not tell anyone directly. I still smiled when spoken to, but something subtle shifted in how I carried myself. I was no longer just surviving. I was preparing. By the end of the third week, the notebook was half full. I had documented weight loss, skipped meals, messages telling me to stop worrying, calls that went unanswered. I even wrote down the dates of my parents' social media posts, noting where they were and what they were doing on the same days I was rationing food. It was not about comparison. It was about context. One night, after recording, I sat on the edge of my bed and thought about what would happen if I stopped. If I stopped recording, everything would disappear the moment my parents came home. The fridge would be restocked, the house would look normal again, the story would reset, and no one would ever know. That thought made my chest tighten. This was not about revenge. It was not about getting anyone in trouble. It was about making sure the truth could not be erased. I did not know who would see the evidence. I did not know when. I did not even know if it would help. But I knew that silence was no longer an option. Somewhere during that week, I realized something else. I was no longer waiting for someone to save me. I was building the tools to be heard. That realization did not make things easier physically. I was still weak, still hungry, still counting days until my parents' return. But mentally, I felt steadier. I had a record. I had proof. I had my own voice. And that changed everything. Because once evidence exists, it has a way of finding its audience. I did not know it yet, but adults were already starting to ask questions behind the scenes. The school, the nurse, conversations I was not part of. The pieces were moving. In part 7, someone finally sits down across from me and asks a question no adult had asked before. Do you want to be safe? And once that question is asked, there is no going back. The first time an adult asked me a real question, it did not happen at home. It happened at school. By the 4th week, the changes in my body were no longer subtle. I could feel it every time I walked up the stairs. My legs felt heavy, my breathing shallow. Sitting through an entire class without resting my head on my hand took effort. I was trying harder than ever to look normal. But sometimes trying too hard is what draws attention. Ms. Reynolds asked me to stay after class one afternoon. Her tone was calm, the way it always was, but there was something different in her eyes. Concern, mixed with certainty. She asked me how I was sleeping. I said fine. She asked me if I was eating enough. I shrugged. Then she asked the question I was not prepared for. Are you safe at home, Evan? I did not answer right away. The room felt smaller suddenly. My heart started beating faster, not from fear exactly, but from the weight of the moment. This was the line I had been avoiding for weeks. Once crossed, there would be no easy way back. I nodded automatically, the way I always did. Habit took over before honesty could catch up. Ms. Reynolds did not push. She just said thank you for answering and told me I could go. But the question followed me the rest of the day. The next afternoon, the school nurse called me in again. She checked my vitals carefully. She asked similar questions, gentle ones. She did not accuse. She did not assume. She observed. She wrote notes, more than before. I noticed Ms. Reynolds speaking quietly with the nurse in the hallway afterward. They both glanced in my direction when they thought I was not looking. That night, my mom emailed me. The subject line was blank. She said the school had been trying to reach her. She said she was annoyed by the interruptions. She told me I needed to stop saying things that made people worry. If you embarrass us, she wrote, people will start making up stories. She reminded me again that families like ours did not need attention from outsiders. I stared at the screen, then opened my notebook and wrote down the date. I copied her words exactly. The next day, the principal called my parents again. I was not there for the call, but later I learned how it went. My mom sounded calm, warm, concerned. She said I was imaginative. She said I worried too much. She said there was no problem that could not wait until they came home. When the school asked who was caring for me, she said I was fine on my own, that I had always been independent. There was a pause. Then the school asked again. This time, the questions were more specific. Who checks on him? Who prepares his meals? Who is responsible if something happens? My mom ended the call politely. She promised to follow up. She did not. The nurse completed a report that afternoon. Weight loss, fatigue, dizziness, parents unreachable. She did not dramatize it. She did not speculate. She documented. Ms. Reynolds signed it. At that point, it stopped being a personal concern. It became a professional responsibility. I did not know any of this as it was happening. I just knew that the atmosphere at school had changed. Teachers watched me more closely. The nurse smiled at me more gently. Something was moving behind the scenes. 2 days later, I was called out of class and asked to sit in a small office near the front of the building. A woman I had never seen before was waiting there. She introduced herself as Angela Morris. She said she worked with Child Protective Services. Her voice was calm, steady. She did not rush. She asked if she could talk with me for a few minutes. I felt a rush of emotions all at once. Fear that I had done something wrong, guilt that my parents might get in trouble, relief that someone was finally here. She did not start with accusations. She started with a simple question. Can you tell me about your day yesterday? So I did. I told her about school, about walking home, about what I ate or did not eat. She listened. She wrote notes. She did not interrupt. Then she asked something no one had asked me before. Do you want to be safe? I hesitated. My mom's voice echoed in my head. Do not embarrass us. Do not make problems. Then I thought about the empty fridge, the shaking hands, the notebook full of dates and facts. Yes, I said quietly, I do. Angela nodded. She did not smile. She did not frown. She just acknowledged the answer like it mattered. Because it did. That was the moment the story stopped being only mine. From there, everything moved faster. Phone calls were made. Reports were filed. Adults talked in rooms I was not allowed to enter. I felt scared. I felt guilty. I felt lighter all at once. For the first time, someone believed me without asking me to prove my pain. If you are listening to this right now, let me ask you something. Do you think schools should step in when something feels off, even if a child is not asking for help directly? If you have a thought, leave a comment with the number 1. I read every single one, because in part 8, my parents come home, and the truth I recorded is waiting for them. After Angela Morris left the school that day, I did not go home right away. Instead, I was taken to a quiet office where another adult sat with me until the end of the school day. No one explained everything at once. They moved carefully, like they understood that too many words could be overwhelming. That evening, Angela came to my house. She did not arrive with flashing lights or raised voices. She knocked gently. When I opened the door, she introduced herself again and asked if she could come in. Her tone was calm, professional, and steady in a way that made me feel less like I was in trouble and more like I was being taken seriously. The first thing she did was look around. Not judgmentally, not dramatically, just observantly. She noted the quiet, the dim kitchen, the lack of food in the refrigerator. She opened cabinets with my permission. She asked simple questions. When was the last time groceries were bought? Who usually cooked dinner? When I last spoke to my parents? I answered honestly. Then she asked about the recordings. My heart started beating faster as I went to my room and brought back the tablet and the notebook. This was the part I had prepared for, but still felt nervous about. Once I handed them over, the story was no longer only in my control. Angela sat at the kitchen table and began watching. She did not rush through the videos. She did not skip ahead. She watched each one carefully. The fridge, the scale, my voice reading dates and facts, the automated bank message. My mom's texts played out loud in the quiet room. Occasionally, she paused to write something down. She asked clarifying questions, but never accusatory ones. She asked about timing, about routines, about how I felt physically on certain days. The notebook took longer. She flipped through page after page of dates and notes, meals, symptoms, missed calls, social media posts from my parents that matched the same days I had written about hunger and dizziness. What I saw on her face was not shock, it was recognition. At one point, she looked up and said something that stayed with me. "Thank you for keeping such detailed records." That was when I realized how unusual my situation had become. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was documented. Angela explained that based on what she had seen, she needed to open an official case. She used careful language. She did not label anyone as guilty. She talked about safety and responsibility and next steps. She told me that until my parents returned, arrangements would be made to ensure I was not alone. She asked if there was a relative I trusted. I mentioned my aunt, Rachel Turner, my dad's sister, who lived nearby and had always been kind to me. Angela made a call. That night, I stayed at my house, but I was no longer by myself. Another adult checked in. The following day, I packed a small bag. Everything happened quickly and slowly at the same time. Over the next few days, Angela and others returned to the house. They checked utilities. They reviewed grocery receipts. They verified timelines. They requested additional information from the school and the bank. I learned new words: documentation, verification, follow-up. The story was no longer emotional. It was procedural. And that mattered, because procedures do not care about excuses. They care about facts. My parents were contacted again. This time, the tone was different. They were informed that an investigation was underway, that questions needed to be answered, that records were being reviewed. I did not hear those calls, but I saw the emails afterward. Short, formal, no emojis, no casual reassurances. The contrast was striking. At one point, Angela explained something that helped me understand why this step mattered so much. When a third party confirms something, she said, it changes how the situation is handled. It means the concern is no longer just personal. It becomes official. That word stayed with me. Official. It meant that the story could not be rewritten later. It meant the fridge could not simply be restocked and everything forgotten. It meant my parents could not return and say it was all a misunderstanding. The truth had been recorded. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel relieved the way I thought I might. Mostly, I felt tired and strange, like my life had shifted slightly off its original path and there was no clear map for what came next. But there was also something else: validation. For weeks, I had been told that I was overreacting, that I was dramatic, that I should handle things quietly. Now, someone with authority had looked at the same facts and said, this matters. That changed how I saw myself. I was not a problem. I was not exaggerating. I was a child who needed protection. By the time my parents' flight landed back in the country, the case file was already thick. Videos, notes, reports, timelines. They were coming home to a house that no longer held their version of the story, and they did not know it yet. In Part 9, my parents walk back into our neighborhood. They expect a welcome. Instead, they find that everything has already changed. After the event, things did not explode. They unraveled, quietly, slowly, in ways that could not be reversed. My parents stopped calling as often. When they did, the conversations were cautious, measured. They no longer spoke with certainty. They spoke with hesitation. The authority they once carried in our dynamic had weakened, replaced by an unfamiliar distance. Lauren did not contact me at all. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned that she was frustrated, embarrassed, that she felt blindsided, that she believed I had crossed a line by making things public. But nothing I had done was impulsive or hidden. Everything had been documented, verified, transparent. That was the difference. For the first time in my life, I was not trying to fix the family narrative. I was not smoothing edges or absorbing discomfort to keep peace. I had drawn a boundary and stood behind it without explanation. And the world did not end. The house remained mine. The agreement with the company moved forward carefully and legally. Renovations were planned with respect for the structure. The income provided stability, not excess. stability. More importantly, the house became neutral again. It was no longer a battleground. It was no longer a symbol of conflict. It was simply my home. That clarity extended into other parts of my life. I noticed how often I had been shrinking myself without realizing it. How many decisions I had framed around avoiding disappointment rather than pursuing alignment. How often I had mistaken endurance for virtue. Letting go of that mindset was uncomfortable, but it was also freeing. There was no dramatic reconciliation with my family, no tearful apologies, no sudden understanding, and that was okay. Not every story ends with resolution. Some end with acceptance. I accepted that my parents loved me in the ways they knew how, but that their love came with expectations I no longer agreed to meet. I accepted that Lauren and I would not have the relationship I once hoped for. That proximity did not guarantee fairness. That shared history did not require shared ownership. And I accepted something else. That protecting myself did not make me selfish. It made me honest. For a long time, I believed that family demands deserved automatic compliance. That sacrifice was proof of character. That saying no meant losing everything that mattered. What I learned instead was this: an unreasonable request does not become reasonable because it comes from family. Pressure does not become love because it wears concern as a disguise, and your value does not depend on how much you are willing to give up to keep others comfortable. Boundaries are not walls. They are definitions. They define where responsibility ends. They define what belongs to you. They define who you are when no one else is deciding for you. Standing firm did not make me powerful overnight, but it gave me something far more important: ownership of my own life. If this story resonated with you, if it made you reflect on your own boundaries or relationships, I invite you to engage. Like the video if it gave you something to think about. Leave a comment sharing your perspective or experience. Subscribe to the channel if you want more stories like this, told with honesty and depth. Your interaction helps these conversations reach people who might need them. In the next video, we will explore a new story focused on financial pressure, family expectations, and the moment someone chooses clarity over obligation. If this series spoke to you, I hope you will continue with us. Thank you for listening all the way through. And remember, choosing yourself is not betrayal. It is responsibility. See you in the next part.